All right. So like I said, my name is Clovis Grant, and by day I work in the human services. I work in youth homelessness for an agency called 360 Kids, and we focus on youth homelessness. And then I'll get my wife to just to say a few words as well.
All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. I'm Sharon Grant, and as for myself, right now I'm an educator with the Toronto District School Board. And as Clovis said, we have two sons who were both educated in the Toronto District School Board. So from their K to 12 years, our one child, our oldest child, going through the regular stream, if we would use that term, and our other child going through the exceptional needs stream. And so that's some of the lens that we bring with us this morning as we take you on this journey, as we discuss how to ensure more success for our children with special needs, but specifically in our case with our Black children. Myself, I've had a lot of involvement in the special needs community, sitting on various boards of directors and leadership councils for Autism Ontario, Community Living, Autism Speaks. Actually, for 1 year before becoming an employee of the board, I was a Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC rep, for a year. And as a result of the journey that we've been on with our youngest child, we decided last year to start a Black parent support group. For years, I've been going to different support groups associated with different agencies, but often would be in the space and look around and not see anyone that reflected myself, not the speaker and not the other parents in the room. I mean, there might have been one or two on occasion. And oftentimes we connect and say, you know what, we could use a group for ourselves where we can kind of come together and talk freely and talk on a different level beyond the prescriptive conversations that we have about navigating the school system, navigating resources, and so on. But as the years went on, it never happened. And then, years back, maybe 10 years or so back, I would start to see advertisements for groups for French-speaking parents, families. I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. But where's something for Black families? And then I would say, oh, now we've got something for Mandarin and Cantonese-speaking families, Chinese families, East Asian families. Okay, but where's something for Black families? And then I think the SAC Center, the South Asian Autism Awareness Group, they've been around, I think, about 10 or so years. And I was so moved and inspired by the work that they were doing. But again, I was like, but again, we too, as an African community, we need something for ourselves. We need a little bit more. At least that's how I felt and the few parents I bumped into. And so finally I decided 2020 was going to be the year, and with the support of Clovis, because I knew it's something that I didn't want to take on alone, we decided we would do it. And we envisioned maybe, 10 or so families, we'd get together online, and once the pandemic was over, we'd do some backyard barbecues and limes and hanging out and so on. But we now, this November will be a year, have over 150 families from coast to coast across Canada who join us from time to time on our virtual meetups. And that speaks volume to the need and the void that needed to be filled. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the group throughout our presentation, but just for you to understand the lens and the conviction and passion that we bring to this topic.
Yeah, and when we talk about the title, so why the title, It Takes a Village? We know that, in fact, there's a word missing there. It should say it takes a whole village, because it really is about a group of people working together to support our kids. This is not from Hillary Clinton, although she has a book by the name, but this is really African, and it's a thinking. I grew up in Jamaica. And I grew up in a very small town, Jamaica. And this concept of the village makes a little bit more sense in the smaller context, so much harder in a big city like Toronto, where you basically have to pay to get people to be your village. So it's tough for communal societies like the Black, the African communities, living and staying in an individualistic culture like the one we're in. And so when we talk about It Takes a Village, there's some intentionality that has to happen in terms of how to make this happen.
And so we know that there's going to be different people on the call this morning, or perhaps later. We know that this is being recorded. And so as this is shared with other individuals that weren't able to attend with us this morning, we know that you're going to be here for different reasons. Firstly, you are Black, you identify as Black, as African Canadian. Secondly, you are raising a child, a loved one with some type of exception, with some type of disability. Thirdly, perhaps you were a staff person, racialized or not racialized. You're a staff person who is supporting a family and or children with special needs. And finally, you realize you can't do it alone, and perhaps we shouldn't be doing this alone.
Mhm.
And you want to learn more about how do we create this village, this wrap around the support for the individual child.
So what are we up to today? One, we're going to help you know where to go to for support, information, resources. Number two, to create that sense of intentionality. So that word will come up a lot about being intentional. And this is not meant to be a downer, to bring hope. That's really what we want to share. And lastly, some practical tips and techniques for self-care, because that is such an important part of our work as well. And maybe in the chat, if you want to just note whether your child or you're caregiving for somebody who's in the primary grades, the younger grades, grade high school, or whether your child is in an intensive support program or a regular class, because we want this to be helpful as well and applicable to your needs. So again, if your child is in grade 3 or younger, grade 4 to 6, grade 7 to 8, or high school, and whether they're in an ISP, intensive support program, or a regular classroom. So that's what the next 40 minutes or so is all about. And please, if you have questions, we're going to monitor the chat. So please put your questions in the chat, and we'll follow along as we go. And there will be time at the end. We'll make sure there's time for you to have to ask those questions. Okay. So why do we need a village? I'm going to spend a bit of time here because it'll help set the context as to why we need to talk about this and look at the specifically. We're going to start off by looking at the education outcomes for our Black students. And I'm going to actually jump to the third bullet point there, where it says they need to talk about race and disability, because we've heard a lot of discussion, and certainly before George Floyd, but most certainly when the situation with George Floyd and how that has changed the world and the conversations. But one of the things, if you could really pay attention to discussions in the media, there hasn't really been a lot of conversation about race and disability. It's almost like this, the conversations around race does not impact our kids who have special needs. Well, let's take a look at some data. And this is actually specific Toronto District School data. And you can actually find this information online as well. It's entitled The Intersection of Disability Achievement and Equity. It's a 2013 report by Robert Brown and Gillian Perrick within the Toronto District School Board. And there, from the title, you could see that they're looking at that intersection, that race and disability. And it's a long document, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but just really highlight the areas where I think for our purposes, it helps us to understand what it's like within the board, this issue of race and disability. So one of the things that we find out or learn from that report is that Black students represent across the board about 12% of the Toronto District School Board population. So 12%, so almost just over 1 in 10. And when you look at the special education population, Blacks represent about 29%. Think about that for a second. 12% of the population, but yet 29% in special education. Makes you think that Blacks are more predisposed to being in special education, which we know is not the case. Here's another piece of data. Gifted students have a higher outcome typically than other groups within the special education population. Gifted, I should remind, gifted is also in the special education category. Blacks represent about 5%, less than 5% of the gifted population. East Asians, who represent about 18% of the Toronto District School Board population, they represent 29% of the gifted. And white students represent about 34% of the population within the school board. But yet, when you look in the gifted numbers, 52%, so more than half of all gifted students are white. So you have to ask yourself, does that mean whites are so much smarter or more gifted than Blacks? Or is there a problem? I keep going. When we think about outcomes, we talked about the outcomes for gifted students. Well, 11% of students in congregated classrooms, so that's another word for the ISB's intensive support program. About 11% of those students actually take academic courses, and we know that that's directly correlated to the outcomes of kids, of young people. So 11% of students in congregated classrooms actually take academic courses. 40% of kids in special education regular classes are taking academic courses. And you compare that to 82% of students in non-special education classes are taking academic courses. So you see, if you're in special education, you're more than likely not going to be taking any academic courses. And nearly all, about over 99% of gifted students are taking academic courses. Why is that all important? Well, when you take a map of the city of Toronto and you look at the socioeconomic levels, you will see a huge correlation between where racialized populations live and the numbers of students who are in special education. And you map that against the students who are in gifted, and you will see that in mostly a higher socioeconomic, which is often related to higher white populations, they tend to be overrepresented in the gifted population. So you start to see something going on here, and the Brown and Perrick report highlights this as an issue that, and I'll quote from them, it's that research has shown that factors such as material advantage and access to resources can influence one's perceptions of a person's ability. So it means something else is going on. It's not that Black students are more inclined to being in special education, or that white students are more inclined to having better academic outcomes, such as being in gifted, but there is something else going on. I'm going to move on to where this becomes more clear. When you think about the evolution of thought around disability, early on, and many of us still think this way, is the medical individual model. And how that plays a part is when historically, when people think about disability, they think about it from a medical perspective, that this person has a deficit, has an issue, and it assumes that it's the problem with the child or the individual. And when you put those kinds of labels on it, it seems that everybody, for instance, if you have autism, that every child with autism behaves in a certain way. Every child with Down syndrome behaves in a certain way. So it sort of puts broad labels based on the diagnosis. And it really encourages that deficit thinking. The model has evolved over time to what's called the social model of disability. So we've moved from the medical individual model to the social model of disability. And here, the focus is on the structures and the systems that are actually constraining that child. So for instance, when you think about somebody in a wheelchair, that person is trying to navigate a world where they're trying to get around because the systems are built for people who are able to walk. And we saw this very clearly when we had one of those trips of a lifetime to Italy. And that Rome, and actually many of the other cities, are built with stairs. And we were just thinking, my goodness, if we couldn't walk, if we were in a wheelchair, there are so many places that we couldn't access. And this is what that social model is looking at, is saying the problem isn't with the individual. The problem is how we built the system. The problem, when we're thinking about some of these data points around race and disability, is not that Black kids are more deficit in terms of their own development, or they have deficits in terms of their development, but maybe it's the belief systems that's actually constraining them. Maybe it's the attitudes people have around our students that is a constraint. And that leads to the third model of disability, which looks at, they call it the human rights model. And in that model, it's really an evolution of the social model. And so knowing what we know, that there are some biases in the system, it's how do we put legislation, how do we put policies in place to ensure that those things are minimized? And so it would be mandating things like accommodations, equity focus, trainings, all of these kinds of things, trying to get at that specific issue of the constraints that are being put on our young people.
And so, you know, Clovis is basically talking about the elephant in the room. And this study really brings it to light and really has to push us to question back these practices that have been in place for such a long time that are holding Black children back. And unfortunately, these practices still continue. So the families within our group, as I mentioned earlier, they go from coast to coast and across the GTA. And we're still hearing from families that they're still being streamed into less academic programs. And even in ISP programs, intensive support programs, families may be streamed to have their child head towards a DD, a developmentally disabled program, when they perhaps have abilities to be in an autism program. They're not streamed into a gifted program, they're more streamed into a behavioral program. So even within the ISP programs, sometimes families are questioning, is this really the right space for my child? They're still feeling there's a deficit focus when their child is being discussed, that they're not getting the proper information about the supports that exist until after the fact from other families or other sources, and not the schools. And that as Black families, they feel judged when they do ask for support. Everybody has a right to it, but for some reason our families feel that they're being looked down upon, that they're feeling like they're asking for a handout when that's not the case, when it's actually their right, like any other family, any other parent or caregiver, to ask for these supports. And they're feeling isolated. They're feeling that they're not getting the supports that they need. They feel intimidated to ask for the supports, and that's leading and increasing their sense of isolation.
So we've talked about the village and the why. Now let's get into the how we create that village for our Black child.
So one of the first places where we need to start is parent caregiver engagement and involvement. And that can seem very overwhelming, I'm sure, for those of you in the audience who are parents and caregivers of a child with an exceptionality. And again, depending on that exceptionality. Again, the lens that Clovis and I are coming from, our son is on the autism spectrum, but he has his challenges. He has his aggressions, he has, difficulty expressing himself. And so unfortunately, it can come out quite physically. And he's a big boy, or I should say a big man now, almost 25 years old. And so to think about involvement, it's challenging. We're also lucky that we're in this together. That's not the case necessarily in different families. You may be in a single parent situation, or perhaps you have a partner who doesn't really buy into the situation, or you're a grandparent or even a sibling caring for a sibling. But it's so important to get involved, to be in the know. There's a lot of opportunities out there to sit on committees or boards of directors or attend focus groups and so on. That's how I got a lot of my information in the early years raising our son, is being there, and really you'll learn so much from other parents that unfortunately some of the agency leads don't fill you in on. It's important to consider that early and ongoing planning for post 21. You don't want to wait till your child is 16, 17, 18 to start planning for post 21. You want to start doing that now. If your child is 4, 5, 15, whatever the case may be, and you're engaging in those discussions when you're attending meetings at school, parent-teacher interviews, creating the IEP, and so on. You want to be looking at those significant transition points. For those of you who have your children in high school, make sure they get those 40 hours. I personally, as a parent and an educator, I love that mandatory piece of getting those 40+ hours of volunteer hours, because it's a great opportunity for our young people to get out there and try different volunteer opportunities and start to get to know themselves a little bit better, what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're not so good at. We had a little bit of difficulty getting co-op opportunities for our son, again, because of his aggressive, I don't even know if I like the term aggressive, but again, it did come out in aggression, and the school found it hard to support him and finding the supports to get him into his co-ed programs. So we ended up trying to get those programs for him. And as a result of some of those activities, we started to understand, hey, he really liked the outdoors, and he really likes to get his hands in the dirt. So of late, he's been doing volunteer work at the community gardens for the last couple of years, and he just loves it, and they love him, and he's making such a difference contributing to the community. He has a newspaper route. Why did I get into a newspaper route? Well, I attended a conference. So again, I got involved. I attended an autism conference, and Temple Grandin, a very famous American woman on the spectrum, she shared about the importance of not coddling our children. I mean, she's a very point blank kind of person. And she talked about the importance of not coddling our children, getting them out of the basement, away from those video games, and getting them involved. And I know right now with the pandemic, it's difficult. So this is future planning for when the pandemic really calms down. And she said, something as simple as a paper route. We need to get our kids doing a paper route. There's so many skills you can learn from that. This will be year 6 that our son has been delivering the local newspaper, the Mirror. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And this will be year 6, and he has never missed a day. Snow, rain, cold, warm. He is so proud of his route. The neighbors have gotten to know him. He's gotten to know them. He gets his little bit of money every week, and he feels so great about himself. So again, just some inspiration for you. Mm-hmm. Community resources. Get on those mailing lists, 2, 3, 4 mailing lists. You may get the same email 2 or 3 times. I'd rather get that email, that information 2 or 3 times than not at all. Connect with the agency that connects to your child's diagnosis. So the Learning Disability Association of Ontario, the Autism Society, Down Syndrome Society, the Epilepsy Society, and so on. That's a great place to start for resources and making connections, and also for having your voice heard as a Black caregiver, because again, representation does matter, and they too need to hear our voice and how we need to have resources and services adjusted to meet our cultural needs. And finally, I think I've already alluded to this, getting your young person involved in volunteering when they're younger, leading towards employment opportunities as they get older, and continuing to build those skills over the years.
The school, number 3, needs to be part of that village. And the parents and caregivers as partners really highlights that partnership that needs to happen. As parents, and I'm going to not necessarily rehash what Sharon said, but the the importance of that engagement with the schools. It's not just about the schools and the parents sort of jumping alongside, but the parents are a central part of that partnership as well. And so as parents, let's not abdicate our role. It's so critical for the success of our kids. And recognize too that school is a system. The school board is a system. And these are human services, all intended, all have great mission statements to meet the needs of people and all kinds of people, teaching to your child. But because it's a system, as great as the people within that system, it is still a system. And what ends up happening, the system tends to cater to what's most convenient for the system. And so this is where you hear many kids falling through the system. And our son was one of those kids, but we really pushed to make sure that his needs were met because he has autism. So you've got these great autism programs, but then there is the behavior. Oh, well, I don't know about that. We'll have to put him on a different kind of, and then so on and so forth. This is what happens. The system is great at trying to meet needs, but it often focuses on the needs that are not as great, and those whose needs go a little bit beyond that, you really have to push. And when you look at some of the data I talked about earlier, you start to see that it also doesn't meet some of the cultural needs of our kids. And so this is why, as Black families and anyone caring for a Black child, you really have to be intentional.
And we acknowledge that there can be strained relationships, unfortunately, depending on the staff, the administration that you're dealing with, the challenges, the gifts and the challenges that your child brings. There can be a strained relationship. Somehow you've got to try to work with the school to come to that common understanding where your child is concerned. Trust me, again, we get it. We've been there, we've done that. And now being on the other side as an educator, I know that I have discussions with parents who have been hurt, who have had very challenging relationships with the school system, feel intimidated, feel othered by the system. Somehow we've got to find that resilience to push through that hurt, that disappointment, that anger even, push through and again, find that middle ground to educate the school about your family, yourself, your child, and what their needs are, and find that middle ground. I think especially in these times where there is a racial awakening, this is now the time to really hold the school boards accountable and to really work towards different and better outcomes for our children. One tool is the IEP. It is IEP season right now. And I do hope that you've been reached out to by your school team and that you received that parent consult form. And if you weren't able to complete the form, that you were on the phone with your child's teacher to provide your input into that IEP. When it comes home, and it should be coming home in the next, either this week or perhaps next week, when the IEP comes home, please read it. Grab your favorite beverage, find a corner, maybe when the kids are down or you get, some respite, sit down, take a look at it, highlight, underline, look it over. If there's anything you don't understand, ask the school about it. If there's anything you don't really agree with, speak to the school about it. That needs to be an organic, ever-growing and evolving document that grows and evolves with your child. It shouldn't speak to your child who your child was a year ago. It needs to speak to who your child is now and where we want them to be in June. Transition planning. I alluded to this earlier. There's significant transition times from SK to 1, primary to junior, junior to intermediate, those grade 7, 8 middle school years, and then on to high school. And then of course, preparation for post 21. I mean, some of you, depending on your loved one or the children, the students you're working with, they may graduate on time at 18 or 19 years of age. For others, like our son, he needed those few years till 21. He needed those few years to mature, to gain some more skills before he transitioned to the next journey in his life. but we want to make sure that we're prepared to put the supports in place, the human resources, the physical resources, and so on, to really support our children moving on to that next leg of their life and educational and employment journey. And when we're talking about all of these things and connecting with the school, we don't know, as we build these relationships and hopefully even meet other parents, these different groups that you're going to be a part of as you're in the know and you're learning and educating yourself, you may be finding your child's future roommate, maybe their future partner. Maybe these are people that'll be able to contribute to a circle of support that surrounds your loved one. But the hard work, you've got to do that now. You kind of got to do the front loading of the work now, looking forward to the payoff later.
And while I set the next video up, Sharon will speak a little bit to it.
So this was a video shared by one of our parent members in our group, and it is an American context, but we found to be a very encouraging, uplifting story just about the faith that these parents had in their son, who unfortunately the system kind of wrote off. But these parents had the faith to really be in there and work with him. And yeah, we just hope that you'll find this to be encouraging.
Shine the spotlight on a young person. Despite doctors telling our next guest he'd struggle in math, reading, and sports after being diagnosed with autism and ADHD, Nicholas Watson earned a 4.8 GPA, the highest in his school's history, and he became class valedictorian. Take a look.
No matter how much the world chooses hate, we will choose to love. And no matter how much the world chooses darkness, we will choose to be the light. Being in darkness requires no effort. Being a light does. So, say you're sorry and really mean it. Don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something. And lastly, when you ask someone how they are doing, make sure that you pause long enough to get a response. You just may be the voice they were needing to hear.
I don't know this kid, but I love him. And oh, let me mention this as well. Nicholas, he's an athlete, played not one, not two, but 4 sports: basketball, soccer, track, and cross country. And guess what? This spectacular young man is joining us this morning. It is an honor to have Nicholas on the show with us this morning. Good morning, young man. How are you?
Man, I'm doing great, sir. Still can't believe it. I'm on the BNC. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
I'm so happy to have you here. Look, man, 4.8 GPA, the highest in your school's history. You accepted in over 45 colleges, over $1.5 million in scholarships, and you played 4 varsity sports, and you went all state in those sports. How old are you again? And how'd you do it, bro?
I'm 18. And it just took a lot of perseverance and just, dedication. I mean, people would just, stop right there and just give up. But I've always been challenged. So it was nothing easy, but it was just a habit to me. So I just kept going. And then here I am. I mean,
I want to talk about some of those past challenges in a second, but I want to get to your future real quick. You could have gone anywhere. Once again, over 45 colleges. You picked Harding University. Great college, don't get me wrong, but why that? What was the determining factor for you to pick that particular college?
Okay, so of course, the college had to have great academic programs. And I also had to impact, in basketball. So I had a bunch of offers, from Duke, Fayetteville, Rice, LSU. But I wanted to immediately impact basketball when I came my freshman year. So that's why I had, less colleges I was looking at. And of course I had some D1s, like Euler, they were looking into me. But when I found Harding, it was Christian, it was private. I'm, less in the classroom. Like it was even the structure, even the coaches and the teams were amazing. So I knew it was perfect. It was the right thing for me. And yeah, I'm glad I chose Harding.
Once again, 18, mature beyond your years. I love that you're great in athletics, all state, and that you're going to be playing basketball there. But you know what? You're the epitome of what LeBron says, more than just an athlete. You're an exceptional student. How meaningful is that to you to overcome? Sometimes we get these stereotypes of basketball players just shut up and dribble. How meaningful is it to you to be that example of what LeBron and other athletes are talking about?
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, when I see, other, Black people doing the same thing or like doing something amazing, like, of course, like president, all that. I mean, it makes you look at, oh, I can do it too, because we're the same skin and everything. So it's just amazing. I don't really have that many to say, but I'm just glad. And of course, LeBron is like my biggest role model. I mean, he goes all out. He makes the team better, and he does so much for the community too. And he's an amazing basketball player. So, I mean, he's amazing. So.
I got a feeling you're going to make an impact like that one day on and off the court as well. And amazing describes you, because your story is even more impressive, because when you were a child, you were diagnosed with a severe speech delay, ADHD, and acute autism. I understand you did not speak a full sentence until you were 6 years old. Tell us what those earlier years were like and how you were able to overcome it.
So, of course, when they could tell something was going on mentally, so they went to the doctors and they told me I had the autism, ADHD, processing delays, reading delays. So they said I was going to struggle in, of course, math and reading comprehension. But so my mom and dad would put me in several therapy sessions. Just, people talking to me, telling me to put obstacles and stuff around the room, trying to help me comprehend, make my mind tick. And just over the years, I mean, it just kept clicking. And then, and of course, they put me in a private school, so then, I could be one-on-one. It's different because they don't know how I would respond in a public school the way I was. So they were just looking out for me, being protective. I love them so much. And yeah, and then it just kept clicking. And then, I started to understand math, started to understand reading. And, my parents are like, we need to find these doctors who did this, because who thought this kid couldn't do anything. He's valedictorian. So,
right.
So I'm just honored. I know God was on my side. And I'm just, But,
bro, you know what? I'm happy they believe in you. You believe in yourself. When you see your parents again, please give them a hug for us, because we need more parents like that to believe in their children and raise young men like you. That's our future. You're a saint, bro. I'm just going to mention once again, also a volunteer for a hospice in Texarkana, which you call the most rewarding thing you've ever done in your life. I mean, that is incredible. Let me ask you, you're 18 years old, you're in school, you play sports. What do you do for fun, Nicholas?
I'm back at the house, playing my video games on PS5, watching YouTube, Netflix. I mean, I'm still a normal guy. I gotta have fun, man. So
yeah, okay.
So, yeah.
Bruh, I'm looking forward to great things coming out of you. No pressure. I know you're going to do it. I know you do well under pressure, but I know one day you're going to do something that's going to impact and change the world. And I need you to come back and keep in touch with us here on BNC, because we need to see more examples like you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Good luck with everything. We really appreciate your time, man. Thanks for starting your day with us this morning. It's been an honor to have you on, man. And best of luck to everything. Enjoy your summer, man. Have some fun. Play your video games and get out there and make a difference in the world is all.
Yes, sir. Will do. Appreciate it, sir.
All right, Nicholas. Shine the spotlight on a young person, the Spike Doctor.
Okay. Well, I hope you were inspired by that, because we certainly were, which is why we are sharing it. We'll go back to our slides here for a second. Current. There we go. So we're going to move on. We want to just at least tackle this, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Self-care. I feel hypocritical talking about this because I'm not great at it, but I'm always needing the reminders, because it's like when you're on the airplane and the emergency procedures happen, and they tell you the first thing you need to do is put that oxygen mask on yourself first before you do it to your child or somebody who you're caregiving for. And that metaphor example really reflects on how we should be thinking about ourselves and taking time to meet your needs. Get the rest you need. Guilty. Take time out. Guilty. Eating right, guilty. Like, okay, so I want you to be hopeful. So I know my wife is really, really good at this in terms of carving out times, working out. She's so diligent in making sure she gets her sleep. And so it's a good example for me. And so I don't know where you are at in terms of your own self-care, but it is really critical because if we're pushing ourselves so much that we are not able to meet our kids' needs when because of our own health issues, then we're in double trouble. So it's really critical to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, and part of it is being around others. The support groups that we've created is helping to really carve out that space so that it's very culturally focused, so that people feel that sense of support. I'd say my challenge to you is think about the one thing you can do over the next week to really take time out to take care of yourself. One thing to consider as well, organizations like respite services that allows us pre-COVID, and I'm sure they'll get back into things post-COVID, is take somebody who can actually meet the needs of your child so that you can take the time away. Because I know that finding that village, finding the people to be able to give you that time away can be difficult. I don't know if you want to say anything further.
Well, I was going to say that, it's a hard job, what we're doing with our children. They come with extra work and the supports that they need is not necessarily written in that parenting manual. And we kind of have to be writing that manual as we go. And I think in our culture, I think Black people, just because of what we've experienced generation after generation, we've never really been given permission to be vulnerable. We've never been given permission to admit that our mental health is hurting, is sick. I know Clovis, he had just recently, we both read a book recommended by our son, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. It's again, an African-American context. We need more definitely from a African-Canadian context, African-Caribbean context. But it convicted me about just what we endure daily as Black people when we hear things and see things going on in the news in our communities, when we're dealing with microaggressions in various places and spaces, when we're trying to support our children, our typically developing children, our special needs children. It's a lot, and then depending on how much supports you have right within your vicinity, it's a lot. And we don't often, I'll speak, as a mom here, we don't often stop and say, help, I'm hurting here, I'm broken here, and we just keep going and going and going until sometimes we fall apart. And our children are going to need so much more from us for so much longer than our other children. Again, we know with the pandemic, the Black community has been overly affected by the pandemic because of our underlying health issues. Some of us, again, in very challenging situations, don't have access to the health care and the lifestyle that we need to take good care of ourselves, and also because of our employment. So many of us are on the front lines. And so self-care is so very important. So I just wanted to reinforce the importance of it. And before we finish up here, a summary with our workshop goals, I wanted to go back to the video on the young man there, our little athlete. And one comment that was made, or the fact was that the parents put him in private school because they didn't know how he would do in public school. Those parents obviously had the means or found the means to be able to do that. Not a lot of us are able to do that. And so I'm speaking to the families, but also any TDSB staff who are listening, that we've got to make our classrooms and their school communities such that they provide the supports, that wraparound supports and that partnership and that understanding with home, that our families who have no choice, or and even those who do have choice, don't make that choice to take their child up, because we are doing our utmost to meet that family's needs, to meet them where they're at, and to work together as a solid team in support of that child. So I just really wanted to bring that point to the surface before we pull things together here.
And really, we're at the end, and just reflecting back on our goals. Hopefully, you've got some information, resources to think about, whether it be the respite, the agencies that your child may be connected with, the school social worker. Should mention that they are also a great resource for the community as well. The intentionality we need to have, and even through that video, seeing hope for our kids. And of course, as we just wrapped up, the issue of self-care. So that's a little bit about the group. If you're interested in coming to our monthly, actually twice a month meetings, where we talk about a variety of different topics, our Facebook page, working on our website, but our Facebook page, BPSG, Black Parents of Children and Adults with a Disability Support Group. Our email address is there, bpsgroup2020@gmail.com. So,
and please share that, and please share this information with families and friends that weren't able to join us this morning. And again, there is no obligation to attend our twice monthly meetings. And we definitely put together emails and try and get information out to families on a regular basis. Again, it's just about meeting needs, and we come together and we talk about what we need, and then we work together to figure out how to meet those needs by finding reflective guest speakers and different opportunities for us to empower ourselves and really use our voice to make a difference for our individual loved ones as well as the loved ones of others. So I believe that's it.